The first thing anyone noticed when they walked into the hall that night was the light. It poured from the chandeliers in creamy pools, caught on crystal stems and sequin gowns, bounced off polished marble and the screens hanging like floating windows above the stage. Violins were still humming the last bars of something familiar, something expensive. Waiters moved with the smooth choreography of people who'd been told, more than once, that certain guests were never to be kept waiting. At the center of it all stood Adrian Cole. He was framed by a halo of warm spotlights, a slim microphone in his hand, tuxedo cut sharp enough to draw blood. His laughter carried easily to the top balcony, landing like a practiced hook on every E. Behind him, a giant LED wall showed the event logo and, in one corner, a live view account that ticked upward with every passing second. "Come on," he said, dimples deepening as he paced the edge of the stage. "You didn't come here tonight just to write checks and eat tiny food." The crowd chuckled on cue. "You came here to change lives. And at my events, we have fun while we do it." Front row donors in black and silver clapped, the kind of applause that said they recognized a good performance when they saw one. A few shouted his name like he was a rock star. Cameras flashed, catching his profile, the jawline that had been on magazine covers, the smile that could sell an app, a car, a dream of the future. Far in the back, where the light fell in softer, dustier beams, a man in a cheap, slightly too big suit tried to make himself small. He sat at the end of an aisle, shoulder pressed against the wall, a folded program clenched in both hands. The suit jacket rode awkwardly over his narrow shoulders, the hem of his trousers brushing scuffed black shoes that had been polished until they couldn't give any more shine. His hair was short and gray, his dark skin mapped with fine lines. When Adrian's voice boomed a little too loud, he flinched, just enough that the paper in his hands trembled. He told himself it was just nerves. He was here to listen, nothing more. His granddaughter had begged him to come. "Granddad, you've never heard an orchestra in person," she'd said, eyes bright. "They're giving away a few community tickets. We should go. You deserve something fancy for once." He'd laughed, protest on his lips, but she'd already clicked the button and filled in the form. Now she sat 2 rows ahead of him, her hair in tight curls pulled into a puff, a maroon dress borrowed from a friend, a phone on her lap screened down, for now. On stage, Adrian's eyes swept the hall with the casual ownership of someone used to being the center of every room. "And speaking of fun," he said, "I think it's time we shake things up a little." He shaded his eyes theatrically, peering into the crowd. Cameras shifted, tracking his line of sight like obedient dogs. On one of the screens, the image cut from his face to the sea of round tables, then zoomed, searching. The view account in the corner ticked higher, 128,742 people watching the live stream. "There he is," Adrian said suddenly, pointing. The cameras followed his finger like it was magnetic. The image landed on the back row, on the old man in the ill-fitting suit, mid-flinch. The light found him like he'd stepped into the path of a searchlight. A ripple of laughter moved through the hall, quick and sharp. "Now, folks," Adrian said, "don't we have a dress code?" It was said with a grin, like a joke between friends, but the words hung heavier than that. On the screen, the old man's suit looked even cheaper under the high-definition glare, wrinkled at the elbows, the collar slightly frayed. Adrian clucked his tongue. I'm kidding. So, I'm just teasing you. But you gotta admit," he spread his arms, turning in a slow circle to display the glittering crowd. "You might be the most underdressed person in the room." Some laughed outright. Others smiled tightly, glancing down at their own tailored sleeves as if to reassure themselves that they were still safely on the right side of the joke. A waiter, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, froze in the aisle, eyes widening toward the back row before he ducked his head and kept moving. The old man shifted in his seat, the paper in his hands crackling. He forced his gaze down, away from the screen where his own face stared back at him with startled eyes. "It's all love, I promise," Adrian went on, moving closer to the edge of the stage. "We're family here, right? But I'm curious." He pointed again, eyes bright under the lights. "What's your name, sir?" A microphone materialized in the hands of a nearby usher, who looked from the stage to the back row, hesitant. The old man shook his head quickly. No, no, I'm fine, he murmured, his voice disappearing under the amplified airiness of the billionaires. Adrian cupped a hand to his ear. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What's your name, my friend? People around the old man were turning now, some craning their necks, others sinking lower in their seats, each desperate not to be the one chosen next. The usher reached him, lowering the mic. The old man pushed it gently away. I'd rather not, he said, barely audible. On stage, the host laughed, the sound smooth, practiced. Oh, he's shy. A shy one at a gala. We can fix that. Laughter rippled again, thinner this time. Adrian turned to the band pit. Can I get a little something? A groove. The drummer obliged with a light, jazzy beat. So, Adrian said, looking back toward the rear, how about you come on up here and help us earn some more donations tonight? You sing. I add another 100,000 to the pot. One song. Deal. Phones lifted like a field of small, glowing flowers. Screens lit up, recording, streaming, sending. On the massive display behind Adrian, the camera split. On one side, his smiling face. On the other, a close-up of the old man, eyes wide, jaw tight. The old man felt dozens, hundreds of eyes on him. A low hum filled his ears, the sound of blood and whispers mingling. I'm just here to listen, he said, louder this time, wishing his voice didn't shake. Just here to listen, Adrian repeated. Hey, we love a listener. But tonight's about participation. He gave the crowd a conspiratorial wink. Who wants to hear our friends sing? Cheers. A whistle from somewhere in the balcony. A scattered chant of sing, 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 starting near the front and rolling backward like a wave trying to reach him. The old man's granddaughter had turned in her seat, her face pale under the soft makeup she'd carefully applied at home. Their eyes met. Her phone was in her hand now, half raised, thumb hovering, caught between recording and reaching out. Backstage, near the wing, a crew member whispered to the stage manager, "Is this in the schedule?" The stage manager glanced at his tablet, at the timer counting down the gala segments. "It's not," he said, jaw tight. "But I'm not the one who tells Adrian no." On screen, the viewer count clicked past 200,000. Adrian spread his arms, walking backward as if making room on the stage. "So, I am a generous man. I'm offering you the chance of a lifetime. You come up here, blow us away, and I'll personally match every donation made in the next 10 minutes. Think of the kids, the programs we can fund. All you have to do is sing." The old man's stomach twisted. The program in his hands had softened with sweat. He could feel the grooves of the paper's fold lines pressed into his palms. His knees didn't want to move. He swallowed. "I don't want to be on stage." Adrian clapped a hand over his heart dramatically. "Oh, come on. Don't make me beg." Laughter again, though some of it broke off awkwardly. "Tell you what," Adrian said, turning to the audience with a grin that caught the light just so. "Let's give him a little encouragement. I'm not above a little peer pressure for charity. On the count of 3, we're all going to invite our friend up here. Ready? 1, 2. The hall filled with voices that weren't his. 3. "Come on up," someone shouted. "Just one song," another called. Before he fully understood how it happened, hands were on his shoulder and elbow, gentle but insistent. A man from his row murmured, "It's all in good fun," as he helped him to his feet. The old man's legs felt hollow. He clutched the program like a lifeline as he shuffled down the aisle, each step echoing too loud in his ears. His granddaughter stood halfway, saying his name once, quietly. He forced a reassuring smile he didn't feel and kept moving. Behind him, she slowly raised her phone. As he reached the bottom of the steps, a security guard moved slightly to the side, making space but watching closely, as if the old man might decide to bolt. The usher with the microphone hovered at his other side, eyes darting nervously between face and stage. When he stepped onto the polished wood, the light hit him full in the face, erasing the edges of the crowd. He could see nearly nothing but glare and shadow, with Adrian's tailored silhouette at the center of it all. There he is. Adrian said, clapping as if welcoming an old friend. "What's your name, sir?" The old man licked his lips. His voice felt trapped somewhere beneath his ribs. "Moses," he said finally. His own name sounded foreign under the amplification, the whole swallowing and echoing it back. "Moses," Adrian repeated, drawing it out, turning it into something playful. "What a strong name. Let's all give Moses a hand for his courage." Applause, some polite, some enthusiastic, rolled over him like heat. Moses stared at the floorboards, at the way his worn shoes looked against the stage, dull black against deep, glossy brown. "Now, Moses," Adrian said, leaning close enough that Moses could smell his expensive cologne. "I'm a man of my word. You give us one song, from the heart, and I promise this foundation walks away tonight with an extra 100,000. That's scholarships, health clinics, community centers, all on the power of your voice. How's that sound?" Moses shook his head. "I really don't sing anymore," he murmured. "I just came to listen." Adrian's smile tightened, just slightly. He angled himself toward the audience again, never letting the cameras catch the brief flicker of annoyance. "You hear that?" he said. "He doesn't sing anymore. Well, I think tonight might be the night he changes that story. Don't you?" Another swell of sound. Glasses clinked. Someone banged their palms against the tabletop as if it were a drum. The chant started again, lighter but sharp at the edges. Sing, sing, sing. In the control booth at the back of the hall, a woman in a headset chewed her lip as she watched the monitors. On one screen, a close-up of Moses' face, eyes glossy, jaw clenched. On another, the wide shot of the glamorous hall, sparkling and full. Her hand tightened around a folded piece of paper on the console, a photocopy of an old newspaper page she'd brought to show a colleague during the break, before everything had gone off script. She looked from the photo, a much younger man with a microphone, a headline about a march, a caption mentioning a song that had carried people through tear gas and long nights, to the image on the screen. Moses, older, bent slightly, wearing that same expression of braced humility. She opened her mouth to say something to the director, then closed it again, the words bending her tongue as the clock on the wall ticked on. On stage, Adrian plucked the microphone from its stand and pressed it into Moses' hand. "All right, my friend," he said. "Here's the deal. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. 10 seconds to show this room what you've got. And if after 10 seconds you still don't want to sing, we'll just move on and pretend this never happened. Sound fair?" The crowd made noises of agreement. A few were already lifting their phones higher, framing their shots. Adrian stepped back, arms open as if presenting him. 10, 9. The band fell silent. The clink of cutlery faded. The hall seemed to contract around Moses, the brightness tunnel narrow. His fingers tightened around the microphone until his knuckles showed pale against his skin. 8, 7. On the screen behind them, the live viewer count climbed higher, 243,989. 6, 5. Moses could hear his own breath, harsh against the foam windscreen. In the third row, his granddaughter had risen halfway from her seat, her face a blur behind the glitter of someone's diamond hairpin. 4, 3. In the booth, the woman with the old clipping whispered his name under her breath, unheard, holding paper and headset cord like they were the only things keeping her anchored. 2. The chant softened into a murmur, a vibrating hum around the edges of silence. Adrian lifted a hand, fingers poised for the final count. 1. The whole exhaled and held, waiting. Moses closed his eyes. The microphones, the cameras, the lights, all of it pressed against him, demanding. The weight of 1,000 nights of singing for people who needed comfort, not entertainment, pulsed in his chest like a stubborn heartbeat. "You don't know," he whispered to himself, so quiet the crowd couldn't hear. "You don't know what you're asking." But the mics were good. They caught the words and folded them into the hush. On the big screen, his face filled the frame, eyes closed, deep lines at the corners, lips forming that one sentence. In the control booth, the director glanced at the waveform, then at the woman clutching the clipping. A thin line appeared between his brows. The live view account clicked higher still. The moment stretched, thin and trembling, as if the whole room were balanced on the edge of his silence. Adrian smiled his practiced smile and lifted his free hand in a theatrical shrug, about to turn it into another joke. Moses' grip tightened on the microphone. The cameras leaned in. He opened his eyes, and the world tipped toward the past. In his mind, the polished floor of the concert hall melted into worn wooden planks and scuffed church tiles. The chandeliers became bare bulbs hanging from a low ceiling, swaying gently in the draft. Instead of gowns and tuxedos, he saw Sunday dresses and pressed shirts, people fanning themselves with cardboard programs, the smell of fried chicken and hair oil hanging in the air. He could hear the hum before they started, the murmur of people who'd come to the same peeling building week after week for something they couldn't find anywhere else. A little hope. Brother Moses, the pastor had said back then, hand warm on his shoulder. Lead us. And he had. He'd stood at the front of the cramped church, a younger man with a waist thin enough to cinch with a borrowed belt, sweat already beading on his forehead. The choir behind him shifted in their seats, clearing their throats, waiting for his cue. He remembered opening his mouth and feeling sound roll out of him like it had been waiting its whole life for this one chance. The first note had risen, strong and clean, and faces had turned toward him with a kind of that embarrassed him and filled him up all at once. His voice had not been for spectacle then. It had been for the mother burying her second son, for the steelworker who'd lost 3 fingers last week and his job along with them, for the teenagers bruised by nights with police lights bouncing off their windows. It had been for the marchers, scuffed shoes pounding pavement, knuckles white around signs as troopers advanced. He remembered a long bus ride, the sky outside as gray as the mood inside. Someone had started humming a tune, low and uncertain. He'd picked it up, shaped it into a melody that wrapped itself around their fear and squeezed it into something like courage. By the time the bus doors had folded open onto the noise of shouting and engines and barking dogs, they'd all been singing with him, voices braided together. Later, in a grainy photo that would end up in an old newspaper, he stood in the middle of a crowd, mouth open wide, eyes closed, hands raised, not for applause, but for survival. He'd had chances, later, to make that voice into something glossy, marketable. He remembered the record executive's office, the walls lined with posters of smiling faces, the smell of expensive coffee, the way the man behind the desk had leaned in and said, "You've got something special, my friend. We could package that up real nice." "What do you mean?" he'd asked, fingers worrying the brim of his cap. "We tweak your look a little," the man had said, gesturing vaguely at Moses' dark skin, his plain clothes. "You wear what we give you. Sing what we tell you. Maybe a bit less church, a bit more spice. We'll have you on tour in no time." Moses had looked at the contract. He thought about bills and rent and shoes for growing kids. He thought about the songs he'd sung in hospital rooms, at gravesides, at vigils held under yellow streetlights that flickered but never fully went out. "Thank you," he'd said quietly, sliding the paper back across the desk. "But I think I need to keep my music where it belongs." The man had stared at him as if he'd spoken in another language. "You're turning down money, fame. You sure you want to spend your life in some little church in the middle of nowhere?" Moses had shrugged, heart pounding in his chest. "If that's where my people are, then yes." And so his life had been small, by some measures. He taught kids to shape notes with their mouths and stories with their hands. He'd led songs at fundraisers for broken boilers and community gardens. He'd sung less and less after the day a folded flag had been handed to his daughter at a graveside, after the night spent in a hospital hallway underneath fluorescent lights humming louder than his own humming could manage. He'd only raised his voice when absolutely necessary, when silence would have been a kind of lie. Back in the concert hall, the present pressed in again. The beat of waiting hearts, the sheen of expensive fabrics, the faint buzz of thousands of phones all aimed in his direction. "You don't know what you're asking," he said again, a little louder, the words carrying now. Adrian chuckled, tipping his head toward the crowd. "Sounds mysterious, doesn't it?" he said. "I think that means we're in for something good." Moses looked at him, really looked, The way you look at someone you've only just realized holds a lever on your life and doesn't know it. Do you truly want to hear? He asked softly. Or do you just want to show? The room shifted. It was subtle. A few people straightening in their chairs, others lowering their phones a fraction of an inch. On the balcony, a woman in a simple black dress frowned slightly, as if the question had been meant for her personally. Adrian's smile fluttered. For a heartbeat, uncertainty crossed his face. Then he recovered, the mask sliding back into place. Oh, I think we can do both, he said lightly. Give us a show. Moses, the floor is yours. The floor hadn't been his in a very long time. The last time he'd felt it under his feet like this, his grandson's bed had still been warm in the next room. That bed had been empty now for years. This wasn't about stages, he told himself. It was about the way his granddaughter's fingers shook as she held her phone, the way she was learning, right now, what people with power thought they could demand from people like him. He looked past Adrian, past the first rows of donors, and found her in the soft blur of the middle rows. Layla. She was half standing, half sitting, her mouth parted as if she'd forgotten how to breathe. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Moses lifted the microphone. He closed his eyes for one deliberate breath. Not to escape this room, but to gather all the rooms he'd ever sung in into his chest. Then he began. The first note wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was low and steady, a tone that seemed to slide under the skin of the whole and settle in bones instead of just ears. It carried the grain of age, the rough edges sanded by years of use and disuse, and something else, an iron thread of conviction that did not ask permission to be there. The hum rose, unfolding into words that had been sung on dusty roads and city streets, on front porches and in crowded basements. A song of freedom, of walking on when the dogs and batons and fear said stop. The kind of hymn that had no single author, because it had been forged in the mouths of many, but whose verses had been sharpened in a single small church by a man with a wide-open voice. The whole changed. Conversation died mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates, motionless. A man in a tailored suit, halfway through a sip of wine, forgot to swallow. On the balcony, a photographer lowered her camera slowly, oppressed to the viewfinder, wanting the shot but afraid to click and break the moment. On the big screen, the camera stayed locked on Moses' face, eyes closed, brow creased, mouth moving with the kind of focus that has nothing to do with pleasing an audience and everything to do with telling the truth. In the control booth, the director whispered, "Stay on him. Don't cut away." His hand slid from one fader to another, easing the reverb down, bringing the raw sound of Moses' voice forward. The viewer count in the corner of the stream jumped, 310,000. 325,000. Comments began to blur up the side of the screen in the director's peripheral vision. What is this song? Is anyone else crying? Who is that man? Rewind. What did that billionaire say to him before this? The woman with the newspaper clipping stayed at the monitors, her throat tight. On the old page in her hand, the caption under the grainy photo had mentioned a local choir leader whose improvised verses had turned into the march's unofficial anthem. She'd always wondered what had happened to him. Now, watching the same man decades later, she felt something snap into place, like a chord resolving. Outside the hall, the song spilled into places that had never seen a crystal chandelier. In a bus depot across town, someone scrolling through their feed paused, thumb hovering, as the sound of Moses' voice leaked from their speakers. A pair of kids looked up from their game, eyes wide. In a diner 3 states away, a waitress leaned against the counter, coffee pot in hand, as every conversation in the room faltered and turned toward the small television above the bar. On another screen, someone watched from a cluttered living room, a framed black and white photo of a march on the wall behind them. Their fingers trembled as they turned up the volume. In the front row of the gala, a board member named Victor felt the hair on his arms stand up. He'd heard this voice before. Not the man, but the sound. Not here, but in a video his marketing team had pitched years back, a slick ad with slow-motion footage of kids running through sprinklers, tablets in their hands, the company logo dissolving into a sunrise. The soundtrack had been a modern remix of an old Freedom song, sampled and looped, A female vocalist led over a crowd's chorus. People love nostalgia, the creative director had said then. We dug up this obscure March song, cleared the rights with some publishing house. It's perfect. It says, we've always been on the right side of history. He hadn't thought to ask whose history. Now, as Moses' unadorned voice filled the hall, Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down to see a message from the company's legal counsel. Do you see this stream? Before he could type back, another message appeared. We used that song. The original. We may have a problem. On stage, Adrian stood a little apart, his hands hanging at his sides. At first, he'd kept his expression light, mouth curved in the remnants of his showman's grin. But as the song went on, note after note landing with quiet force, something in his posture shifted. His shoulders rose, dropped. His eyes, which had been on the crowd, dipped to the floor, then to Moses, then back to the giant screen behind them where his own earlier movements, pointing, laughing, beckoning, had been replayed in a loop in the minds of everyone watching. No one was looking at him now. The spotlight had not moved, but their attention had. Moses' voice climbed, not to show off, but because that's where the song always went, up and over the wall of fear, up above truncheons and jeers and the long drag of a weary day. He carried the last note longer than anyone expected, until the air in the room seemed to vibrate with it, until Layla felt it buzzing in her chest like a second heartbeat. When it finally slipped away, it left a silence so full it was almost another kind of sound. For a moment, no one moved. Then, somewhere in the middle rows, a woman exhaled sharply, the sound breaking like glass. It triggered something. Hands came together, hesitating, then faster, the applause rippling outward until the whole hall was clapping, some standing without realizing they'd risen from their chairs. Moses opened his eyes. He saw tears on faces that had been smirking 10 minutes earlier. He saw people looking at him, really looking, like they hadn't when he'd been dragged up here as a punchline. He saw Layla, standing fully now, hands over her mouth, phone forgotten on the seat. He also saw Adrian. The billionaire's smile had slipped. His jaw worked as if he were chewing on words that wouldn't form. For the first time all night, he looked small on his own stage. The applause took on a different texture, still loud, still appreciative, but threaded with something else, the restless shifting of people who had just realized they'd been complicit in something ugly and wanted, desperately, to be on the right side now. In the control booth, the comments pouring up the side of the live stream had changed. He was forced up there. Rewind the first part. This is messed up. Who is this man? Give him his flowers. This is the same melody from that Coal Future ad, right? A hashtag began to appear again and again in the chat, then move on to other platforms as people clipped and shared the moment. # Moses. In the VIP row, Victor pushed back his chair and stood. He made his way to the side aisle and then toward the steps leading to the stage, phone buzzing non-stop in his hand. He ignored it. The legal counsel's last message had included a screenshot of an old rights agreement, a messy tangle of publishing credits and licensing terms that boiled down to one line that made his stomach drop. Original composer unknown, a work for hire. They'd built a major brand campaign on that song, on the idea of struggle and perseverance and justice, on a voice they'd never bothered to name. Up on stage, Adrian had just found his tongue again. Wow, he said, microphone lifted, voice slightly hoarse. Wow, that was something, right? He tried for a laugh, but it fell flat, bouncing off the quiet like a ball dropped in thick grass. Give it up for Moses, everyone. That's what I call raw, authentic. His words withered as Victor stepped onto the stage. The cameras caught the motion, one angle swinging from Moses to the approaching man in a tailored charcoal suit, tie slightly askew from his rapid exit from the row. Viewers watching from home saw the billionaire turn, a flicker of irritation crossing his face before he pasted the smile back on. Victor, Adrian said, forcing cheer into his voice. Didn't know you were coming up. You want to match my donation on that performance. I think he deserves it, don't you? Victor didn't respond at first. He took a second microphone from a stagehand who appeared at his elbow and turned to face the audience. Good evening, he said, his voice carrying more of a tremor than he liked. "I'm sorry to interrupt the program." "No, no," Adrian cut in quickly. "You're the man with the money. You can interrupt any time." A sprinkling of laughs, duty-bound rather than amused. Victor glanced at him, the look brief but sharp. Then he focused on Moses. "Sir," he said, microphone lowering a fraction in a gesture of respect, "I need to say something, and I hope you'll forgive me for saying it in front of all these people. But maybe that's exactly where it needs to be said." Moses shifted his weight, the spotlight suddenly feeling heavier. He didn't answer, but his gaze stayed steady. Victor inhaled slowly. "Years ago, our company ran a campaign. Some of you might remember it. The Forward Together ads. We used a song in those ads. A song that carried a lot of history, a lot of pain and hope, and, well, everything we claim to support." A murmur of recognition rolled through the crowd. Heads nodded. A few people pulled out phones and started searching. At the time, Victor continued, "We were told the rights were clear, that the song was part of the public domain of the movement. We paid a fee to a publishing house and moved on. Tonight, watching Mr. Moses sing, I realized something I should have asked about a long time ago." He looked directly into the nearest camera. "That voice," he said, pointing gently toward Moses, "is the voice from the original recording we sampled. The uncredited voice. The one our brand has profited from without ever asking who it belonged to." The air went thin. Moses blinked, throat working. The old newspaper clipping in the booth suddenly seemed to hum with relevance. "We did not give him proper recognition," Victor said, the words heavy. "We did not seek him out. We did not share our profits. And tonight, we stood in this room and watched him be treated as a joke. That is unacceptable, not just from one person on this stage, but from all of us who have benefited from that silence." Adrian lifted his mic, forcing a laugh. "Okay, Vic, let's not get dramatic. We're all on the same side here. I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Victor replied, turning to him. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "You didn't know because no one in our structure thought it was important to know. We like the sound without caring about the source." He faced the crowd again. "Our foundation claims to stand for dignity, for opportunity, for listening to communities. Tonight, we have fallen short of that, in a very public way." In the front row, someone shifted uncomfortably. In the balcony, the photographer snapped a single photo, Moses between the two men, one powerful and rattled, the other powerful and newly aware, the older man at the center, bathed in the same light that had tried to reduce him. Victor raised his microphone slightly. "So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to properly credit Mr. Moses as a co-author of the song we used, publicly and in every context going forward. Second, we're going to audit all our past campaigns, not just that one, to identify where we have used art and labor from communities without fair recognition or compensation. Third, this foundation's board will commission an independent ethics and equity review, starting with tonight." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Vic, this is not the place." "It's exactly the place," Victor said quietly. "Because the harm happened here. And out there." He nodded toward the cameras. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was hesitant at first, then grew as people recognized that they weren't clapping for showy promise but for a rare public admission that something had been deeply wrong. Moses listened, heart thudding in his chest. This wasn't why he'd sung. It wasn't why he'd refused to sing, either. He hadn't thought of that old recording in years. The afternoon a friend had brought a tape recorder to the church, saying some organization wanted to document the sound of the movement. He'd sung because he'd needed to. He'd signed something, some paper shoved under his hand after the choir rehearsal, all dense text and fine print, and then gone back to setting up folding chairs. He'd never heard from them again. Now, standing under blinding light, he felt like that younger man's unasked question had finally made its way to a microphone. Adrian shifted his weight, eyes flicking from Victor to Moses to the crowd and back. "Look," he said, attempting to regain rhythm, "I think we're overreacting a bit. We're turning a fun moment into a trial. I tease a guy. He's saying, we all got goosebumps, and now we're talking audits. Come on, You know me. I give more to this community than most people in this city. This is what cancel culture does. It takes a... Stop, Victor said. The word wasn't loud, but it landed with the force of a gavel. This isn't about canceling you, he said. It's about finally listening to someone other than you. Adrian's mouth shut. The crowd watched, many holding their breath. Victor turned back to Moses. If you're willing, he said, our lawyers and staff will be in touch with you. Properly this time. But I also want to ask you, here and now, what do you think we should do next? Not as a performance, but in reality. Moses felt every eye tilt toward him again, but the weight was different this time. Not a demand for entertainment, but a request for guidance he wasn't sure he wanted to give. He lifted the microphone, fingers steady now. I'm not a lawyer, he said, voice raspy from the song. I'm not a businessman. I'm a grandfather, a choir leader, when my knees let me stand that long. A small, reluctant chuckle wove through the hall. I don't know all the ways you need to fix what's broken. I just know people should be treated with respect whether or not you find out they did something important before. He glanced at Adrian, not cruelly, but with a steady clarity. You shouldn't need a famous song behind a man to decide not to drag him up here for a laugh. Somewhere in the balcony, someone whispered, Amen, under their breath. Moses looked back at Victor. You want to do right by me? Fine. Pay what's fair for what you used. Put my name where it should have been. But more than that, build something that lasts longer than this news cycle. Listen to the people you say you're helping. Don't just put their stories in your ads and leave them out of your decisions. The hall was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Less stunned, more intent. Victor nodded slowly. Thank you, he said. We have a lot of work to do. He stepped back, signaling to the crew to cut the planned comedy bits and move directly to the more formal part of the program. The director in the booth flipped notes yet again, ripping the cue sheet from its clip and scribbling new orders. Adrian stood frozen for a second, microphone slack in his hand. Then he smiled, brittle around the edges. Well, he said, aiming for levity, this has been an unexpected turn. No one laughed. Moses handed his microphone to a waiting stagehand. As he did, his hand brushed the cool metal of the stand, the same kind of stand he'd adjusted in that small church so many times. Layla was on her feet now, near the aisle, eyes shining. He stepped down off the stage. The same security guard who had watched him warily as he approached earlier now stepped aside, raising a hand, not to block, but to steady him if needed. Moses nodded in thanks, his knees reminding him of their age only when he hit the stays. In the aisle, Layla rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him. The program, crumpled beyond rescue, fell to the carpet. I'm so sorry, she whispered into his shoulder. I should have stopped them. He patted her back, feeling the tremor in her body. You filmed. She hiccuped a laugh. Yeah, everyone did. Good, he said softly. Not so they can watch me sing. So they can watch what led up to it. They turned together and, as they walked back toward their seats, people stood aside, some reaching out to touch his arm, to say thank you, to murmur apologies that had more to do with their own conscience than his comfort. He listened politely, nodded where it seemed kind, accepted none of the excuses. At the back of the hall, near the control booth, the woman with the old news clipping pressed it flat on the console with shaking fingers. The director glanced at it, eyes widening as he recognized the grainy younger face. We're keeping this feed, he said. No edits. She nodded, but her eyes were on the stage, where a man who'd thought himself untouchable stood blinking under a light that no longer wanted to flatter him. The story did not end with that night. The video spread the way all powerful things seemed to spread now, unevenly but relentlessly. People shared clips of Moses' song with captions about unexpected talent and never judge a book by its cover. Others shared the earlier minutes, the part where Adrian had singled him out, had teased, had insisted. They slowed the footage, they added arrows and text. This is where the joke became something else. Commentators weighed in. Opinion pieces sprouted like mushrooms, some praising the sponsor's intervention, some accusing the foundation of years of hypocrisy, some asking why no one, not the stage manager, not the audience, not the board, had stepped in before the MIC was in Moses' hand. In the days that followed, emails flew back and forth in the sleek glass tower where the foundation kept its headquarters. The same logos that had glowed so proudly on the gala screens now appeared in headlines with less flattering words attached. In a boardroom lined with muted art and discreet security cameras, Adrian sat at the head of a long table, fingers drumming. Across from him, Victor, the legal counsel, and the foundation's diversity officer consulted notes and slides on a wall-sized display. The legal counsel went first, outlining potential liabilities, intellectual property, damages, the possibility of a class action suit if other uncredited contributors from past campaigns came forward. He spoke in measured, clinical terms, but every bullet point felt to Adrian like another chip flaking off the marble base he'd placed himself on. Then the diversity officer, a woman named Carla who had been at the foundation longer than Adrian had been a billionaire, opened a different slideshow. Community feedback, the title read. She clicked through screenshots of emails from grassroots partners, quotes from staff exit interviews, comments from the live stream and its aftermath. Many of our community contacts, she said, are using words like unsurprising and typical. They're not shocked by what happened to Mr. Moses. They see it as part of a pattern. What pattern? Adrian demanded. I give more than a pattern, Carla said calmly, of treating people's stories and presence as props for your generosity, of centering your image over theirs, of joking in ways that make staff and beneficiaries uncomfortable but go unchallenged because you signed the biggest checks. Her gaze did not waver. She'd watched him charm senators and CEOs, watched him brush off interns' concerns with a grin. Tonight, she watched him squirm. The question before us, Victor said, steepling his fingers, is whether we're serious about changing that pattern, or if we're content to release a nicely worded apology and hope the news cycle moves on. All eyes turned to Adrian. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking softly. I'm not a monster, he said, more defensive than he intended. I didn't wake up that morning thinking, how can I humiliate an old man tonight? It got out of hand. I was trying to make the crowd laugh. That's my job. I raise money. I keep things lively. And when people felt uncomfortable, Carlo asked, when your assistant tried to get you to move on, when you saw the look on his face. He looked away. He remembered Nora's hand on his elbow near the stage wing. Her whispered, maybe we should go back to the script. He remembered brushing her off with a joke about her being too sensitive. I thought he'd enjoy the attention, he said weakly. I did him a favor. Without me, no one would know who he is. Now everyone does. Isn't that good for him? Victor sighed quietly. This is why we need that ethics committee, he muttered. The boardroom conversation moved on to motions and votes. In the end, the board decided that Adrian would step down as the public face of the foundation's events. He would remain as a donor and board member, but a new chair would be appointed to run galas and public campaigns. An independent committee with real authority, chaired by community leaders and staff representatives, would review event policies, creative partnerships, and staffing practices. In a small box on the agenda, almost an afterthought in appearance but not in impact, a name appeared. Nora, the assistant who had tried to intervene, would join that committee as a voting member. Later, when she received the official notice, Nora stared at the email in disbelief. Her first instinct was to wonder if it was a mistake. She met Moses for the first time not in the boardroom, but in a community center gym that smelled faintly of floor polish and popcorn. He was there to talk with kids about music, sitting on a folding chair with his cane resting against his knee, a plastic cup of water on the floor by his foot. Layla had persuaded him, her enthusiasm beating back his exhaustion. They want to hear you, she'd said. Not just sing. Talk. After the session, when the kids had scattered to the snack table and basketball court, Nora approached, twisting the strap of her bag in her hands. Mr. Moses, she said quietly. He looked up, eyes crinkling. Yes, I was backstage that night, she said. I tried to get him to stop. Not hard enough. I should have done more. I'm sorry. He studied her for a moment, taking in the sincerity in her eyes, the way her shoulders were drawn up around her ears. "You spoke up at all," he said. "That takes something. Most folks stayed quiet." "I was scared to push," she admitted. "Is my boss. His, who he is. And you are who you are," Moses said. "Now you're on that committee they keep talking about, right?" Her eyes widened. "How did you?" He chuckled. "Layla reads everything out loud. She thinks I can't understand email unless she makes it sound like a radio show." His smile softened. "You'll be in rooms I'll never see. So what needs saying when they start forgetting again?" She nodded slowly. "I'll try." "Don't just try," he said gently. "Decide." Trying leaves too much room for backing out when things get tense. It wasn't an absolution. It was an assignment. Somehow, that felt better. Adrian's transformation was not a montage of instant enlightenment. He watched the viral clip of the gala more times than he'd admit to anyone. At first, he watched himself. He flinched when he saw the sharpness in his own gestures, the smirk, the way he ignored the old man's obvious discomfort. He paused on the moment when the crowd laughed with him, then on the moment when they fell silent as Moses sang. He'd always thought of himself as the guy with the microphone and the heart to match it, seeing himself framed not as a benevolent host, but as a bully stung in a way no headline ever had. He went to the community meeting because Victor insisted. He sat in the back, dressed down in jeans and a plain sweater, no cameras in sight. People talked about dignity, about how small humiliations add up, about times they've been singled out in classrooms, offices, stores. Some mentioned the gala. Most didn't. The stories were bigger than him. He didn't speak. He listened. It was a start, not a finish. Policy changes came slowly, as they always did. New guidelines written, trainings scheduled, budgets reallocated. The foundation announced a grant program for community arts led by elders, with an advisory panel that included choir directors, neighborhood poets, drummers who kept time with plastic buckets and battered snares. Moses was invited to serve on that panel. He said yes, as long as the meetings weren't too early in the morning and someone could pick him up if his knees were acting up. Months later, the concert hall looked different. The chandeliers were the same, but the light they cast fell on a different kind of night. No tuxedos, no designer gowns. People came in jeans and church suits and school uniforms, carrying instrument cases and sheet music in badly organized binders. A banner over the stage read, in simple letters, Community Voices Night. Layla fussed with a microphone stand at the front of the stage, lowering it a couple of inches to match the height of the nervous teenager standing beside her. The girl gripped her sheet music so tightly it shook. "You okay?" Layla said softly. "Remember what my granddad told you?" The girl nodded. "My voice is mine," she recited. "I don't owe anyone a performance." "Right," Layla said. "But you said you want to share tonight. So you're not doing this for them." She gestured at the murmur of the crowd. "You're doing it because it means something to you." The girl exhaled, shoulders dropping a fraction. "Okay." At the side of the stage, Moses watched, leaning on his cane. He wore the same suit, but this time it had been properly pressed. Layla had insisted. Someone had given him a small pin to wear on his lapel, the logo of the new arts program that bore his name in small, tidy letters. He tried to refuse, muttering something about not needing his name on anything, but the kids had chanted until he gave in, laughing. In the middle rows, Nora moved between seats, checking the program, whispering cues to the volunteer ushers. When a guest made a joke on his way and about hoping we don't get any more surprise sob stories, she stepped in without thinking. "Actually," she said pleasantly, "we don't surprise anyone here. Every performer tonight chose to sing. If that's not your thing, the lobby is that way." The man blinked, caught off guard. After a beat, he shrugged and found his seat, the edge of sarcasm blunted. Near the back, Adrian sat on the aisle, a simple ticket in his hand. When his name was read out at the beginning with a list of sponsors, there was polite applause, nothing more. He stood briefly, nodded, sat down again. He didn't walk onto the stage. He didn't hold a microphone. When a board member leaned over to ask if he wanted to say a few words, he shook his head. "I'm here to listen," he said quietly. And for once, he meant it. On the wall of the lobby, a new plaque had been installed. It bore Moses' name and a short inscription about his contribution to the historic song and his decades of service through music. Photos lined the hallway. Moses as a young man with his choir, a still from the Freedom March, a screenshot of him singing at the gala, jaw set, eyes closed. Underneath it, a teenager stopped her friend and pointed. "That's him," she whispered. "Is the reason we're all here tonight." Inside the hall, the youth choir took the stage, shuffling into place in a ragged line. Moses moved slowly to a seat off to the side, close enough to step in if they needed encouragement, far enough that the spotlight didn't accidentally pick him up. Layla gave the signal. The piano started, halting but sincere. The kids opened their mouths and let sound out, thin at first, then stronger as they found each other's pitch. There was a moment when one boy faltered, his voice cracking on a high note. He winced, cheeks flaming. Without thinking, Moses leaned forward and caught his eye, tapping his hand lightly against his knee in a steady rhythm, nodding once. The boy swallowed, then came in again on the next line, more sure. In the audience, people swayed gently. Some sang under their breath. There were no phones held wildly in the air this time, no frantic need to capture and share. A few people recorded, sure, but most watched with their eyes and listened with their whole faces. As the evening went on, performers came and went. An old woman with a rasping blues voice that sounded like the edge of a broken bottle smoothed by time. A trio of high school rappers trading verses about their neighborhood. A father and daughter duo who stumbled over their guitar chords and laughed together when they did. Backstage, a volunteer joked once about dragging someone up for fun, and then caught himself, the words turning sour in his mouth. "Maybe we just asked for volunteers who already raised their hands," Layla said lightly. "No dragging." Everyone nodded with an intensity that made them all grin a little at themselves. Toward the end of the night, someone from the committee approached Moses. "Would you be willing to lead one more song?" they asked. "We thought it might be nice to end together." Moses looked out at the hall. He saw faces he knew and faces he didn't, people from his block and from neighborhoods across the city, rich and poor, young and old. He saw his granddaughter, her cheeks flushed from running backstage. He saw Nora, her clipboard finally abandoned on a seat, hands clasped in her lap. He saw Adrian, sitting quietly, eyes turned toward the stage, expression unreadable. He considered the request. He thought of that night months ago, the hot, tight feeling in his chest as he stood under these same lights for all the wrong reasons. He thought of the questions and phone calls and meetings that had followed, the way his phone number had suddenly become valuable to people who'd never known it existed. He also thought of the kids he'd heard tonight, their voices cracking and soaring, their confidence growing with each held note. He thought of the boy whose voice had broken and then found itself again. He pushed himself to his feet. When he stepped up to the microphone, no one chanted. No one counted down. They simply waited. "This song," he said, voice steady. "We sang it a lot back then. Some of you know it. Some of you heard a piece of it in a commercial and didn't know where it came from." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd, gentler than before. "I'm not mad at anyone singing it," he said. "Songs are meant to travel. I just want us to remember what they were carrying when they were born." He nodded to the pianist. The first chord rang out, simple and familiar. He began to sing, not alone this time, but as a lead voice in a hall full of others. People joined in hesitantly at first, then stronger. Some sang harmony, others just hummed, doing their best. Layla's voice wove through the youthful ones. Sure. Nora's voice was thin but determined. Even from his seat in the back, Adrian found his throat moving, sound escaping in a rough whisper he hadn't planned. The song swelled, filling the spaces between seats, between pews in memory, between past and present. It belonged to Moses and to the people who had first sung it beside him, and now it belonged to all of them in a new way, not as a soundtrack to someone else's brand, but as a shared declaration. When the last note faded, the hall did not explode into applause right away. For a few seconds, there was just breathing, people sitting with the weight of what they'd sung, feeling the echoes settle. Then they clapped, not because someone told them to, Not because a charismatic host cued them, but because gratitude and respect have always needed a way out. Months later, in places far from that hall, the legacy of that night, and of the one before it, showed up in small, stubborn ways. A manager in an office caught herself before making a joke at a junior employee's expense in front of the team. She heard Mose's voice in her head saying, "You shouldn't need a famous song behind a man to decide not to drag him up here for a laugh," and closed her mouth. On a city bus, when a group of teenagers started mocking an old man's clothes, a fellow passenger turned around and said, "Enough. That's not how we treat people." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. The laughter died down, the boys looking away. The old man stayed at the floor, then out the window, shoulders easing just a little. At a school assembly, a principal planning a talent show decided to ask for volunteers weeks in advance rather than pulling surprise guests from the crowd. Performance should be a choice, she told her staff. Not pressure. These moments didn't trend. No hashtags appeared, but they came from the same root. In his small house, Moses sat by the window some afternoons, listening to recordings kids sent him of their choirs, of their beats mixed with old hymns. His knees still ached. His heart still hurt for losses that would never be restored by any plaque or check. But when Layla sat with him and scrolled through messages from people who'd watched the gala clip and decided, in one small moment, to speak up where they once would have stayed quiet, he allowed himself a thin smile. "It's not enough," he'd say sometimes. "I know," she'd reply, "but it's something." One evening, as the sun bled orange through the sheer curtains, she turned to him with her phone in hand. "Someone asked me a question online," she said. They saw the video again and wrote, "What are we supposed to do when we see stuff like this happen? We're not billionaires or sponsors. We're just people in the room." He thought for a moment. "Ask them a question back," he said. She tilted her head. "What kind of question?" "The kind that doesn't let them stay comfortable just watching," he replied. Later, as Layla typed, she shaped his idea into words that could travel. "The next time you see someone being treated as less," she wrote, "who will you be? The one holding the microphone, the one who looks away, or the one who decides that this time, silence isn't enough?" She hit send. Somewhere, on a bus or in an office or at a dinner table, someone read it and felt a small, steadying note vibrate in their chest, like the beginning of a song.